coming up on this episode of the Roundtable.
I think you're right. At this point, it's actually not all that insightful to say, like, feminists are wrong and fundamentally anti-human in their view of gender, and, like, you know, these things have fallen apart, and these narratives have fallen apart and have harmed people in all sorts of ways. Like, lots of people now say that. I think the attraction in his shtick is precisely in the garishness, right? In the over the top, the assertion, and this is why I say that, like, there's a very real thing that you see a lot now, where because these pieties are so shriekishly enforced, so shrilly enforced, to disregard them with great kind of elan and relish, right?
Yeah.
This is the Trump phenomenon, of course, as well,
right.
you know?
Right.
And so then it's like, well, what's the most, like, assertively over the top offensive version of this that I can say? Well, I'm converting to Islam, and I'm getting a harem, and I'm supporting ISIS, and I'm doing all these things. Like, there really is, I think, I don't know, in small ways, I feel like we all get into this, like, online, or I do, I'll put it this way. Online, I often will find myself attracted to the most kind of combative and over the top version of the thing that I want to say, precisely because I'm just so pissed off at some person who's been like, you can't say blah, blah, blah. Hello and welcome back to the Roundtable, your weekly publishers and editors podcast here at the American Mind 2023, breaking into a new year. Very excited to be back with you. Hope that everybody had a restful and blessed holiday season. I had a great time traveling around. I was briefly in London, which was a blast. And I am joined today by managing editor Seth Barron. He's the only guy I could get to come on the show. We had several votes about who else should join us, but we just weren't able to reach a conclusion. We were stalemated on the votes. So it's just you and me, Seth. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great, Spencer.
Excellent. Well, I imagine that people know I'm joking about the House Speaker vote, which, as of this recording, remains deadlocked at 6 votes. I'm not sure. I think it's likely that by the time people hear this, there will have been some sort of resolution to this conflict. But for the last several days, what's been happening is that the Republicans have been unable to reach the necessary number of votes for Representative Kevin McCarthy, who, as I understand it, was really the only person who stepped forward. And perhaps that's part of the problem. I think that this is being understood as a rebellion against politics as usual, as kind of, you know, frustration with middle of the roadism, with GOP establishment, however you would like to describe it. I mean, we've gone into detail on these matters on the show before, and our listeners generally don't need us to rehearse the dysfunctions of the Republican Party, but they're certainly in evidence at the moment. We've got, it's sort of vacillated between 19 and 20, but usually 20 votes for alternative candidates. At this point, we are looking at Byron Donalds of Florida is the kind of alternative speaker who's got 20 votes. We had one present vote, which is to say an abstention. And we've got 212, that is a total of all Democrats voting for Representative Jeffries. Hakeem Jeffries is their nominated speaker. You need 218 votes normally to win, but when people drop out, then you need fewer votes. So with the one abstention, you need 217 votes. I have been joking on Twitter, although it's more of like, it's sort of a nervous laughter, that it would be just like the Republicans to abstain en masse from the vote rather than vote for McCarthy and just therefore let Jeffries slide by as Speaker of the House. But in seriousness, I doubt that's what's most likely to happen, I mean, to me, it seems like what's most likely to happen is that eventually they will circle the wagons around McCarthy. He's precisely because he is kind of this bland politics as usual guy. He's the only person that has really, he's the only person that would like sign up for this role, which is kind of a sucky role to begin with. But it's the other sort of alternative history version of this that I find kind of nervously amusing to contemplate is like, what if this is the sort of minor procedural spark that lights the conflagration, which eventually like brings the republic crashing down to its knees. The mood in the air is such that one almost feels as if like anything could be the like Franz Ferdinand of the American Republic. But this is all a grim set of reflections to be embarking upon at the beginning of the new year. This is a stalemate, a kind of stalemate that hasn't happened for 100 years. 1923 was the last time this took place. So it's not unprecedented, but it's not a good look for the Republican Party, would you say, Seth?
I don't know. I mean, I don't think it really matters that much in terms of like the appearance or the image of the Republican Party. I mean, I think that's the way that they would like to spin it. I'm curious, how do you see this as like kind of possibly leading to a legitimation crisis or like a crack in the American empire? I mean, to me it's like, I mean, I always like it when democracy breaks out a little bit. And,
yeah.
So to me it's like, I mean, usually I suppose these things happen behind closed doors, right? Like
right.
Nancy Pelosi gets the squad assembled beforehand and is like, here's what I need from you. What do you want from me? Et cetera, et cetera. I'm kind of curious, like, what is it exactly that they want that McCarthy's not willing to give them? Or are they really that? I mean, usually that's what this comes down to, right? Some kind of horse trading. Like,
right.
We want to make sure that we can audit Department of Homeland Security or whatever it is they want to do. We want to impeach Mayorkas, or we want to, whatever. I don't know what they want. So what's your impression of what's going on?
Okay, well, yeah. So first questions first, like on the subject of bringing the Republic down around our ears, I was completely joking. It's a kind of like, I like to game out these elaborate like alternate history scenarios where like the Republican Party can't arrive at a leader and then they dissolve as a party and the uniparty rule is finally established and the Dems feel emboldened to take whatever and then 20 steps down the line, for want of a nail, the kingdom was lost. But I don't actually think that's not actually what I think is going to happen.
I get it.
Yeah. I totally take the point that, well, at least they're having some sort of fight over something. And I also think that it's a good question, like what exactly are they having a fight over? I think your point about the Democrats, your comparison with the Democrats is apt. This does sort of show the difference in, I don't know, just like machine oiling that the two parties have. And I wish sometimes that the Republicans were a little bit more proactive about these sorts of debates rather than having them in these kind of crisis struggles. I wish that they would that the Republican Party had been more responsive to the concerns that I think are being raised here, which are basically like Trumpian or post-Trumpian concerns. Like I think that the sentiment, the anti-McCarthy sentiment, is as vibey as anything else. It has to do with like, this guy is a starched suit. He is going to make compromises and deals. He's already kind of gesturing toward making some sort of compromise with the Democrats to get the vote done. And fair enough to make an actual stand against that. If that's, I mean, you're right. Like that's part of the game. There's nothing illegitimate about this process. I think, probably one thing they really want is a really hardcore Hunter Biden investigation. That seems like a major win for the like populist part of the party, and they may feel like McCarthy isn't going to do that or is going to squish on it or something and is going to be too willing to like reach out. I mean, they want probably somebody that recognizes the Democrats as like thoroughgoing enemies of the American republic rather than just your run-of-the-mill sort of horse trading partners on the floor, which fair enough. But yeah, I doubt that there'll be any like positive outcome from it.
Well, it's funny because, yeah, I agree that's sort of, it's like this vibe thing, like the, Trump, post-Trump, never Trump, whatever it is. But Trump has come out like with this full-throated defense of McCarthy, saying like, why are you screwing this up? To the dissidents. He's like, we have a great chance here. We need to get behind McCarthy, which, maybe Trump has made his peace with McCarthy and doesn't want to, screw things up for himself and make himself seem like more on the outs. It's a funny dynamic though, because then you've got the Matt Gaetzes and the Marjorie Taylor Greens, who are like the classic Trump MAGA types, going against him. I mean, it's a weird situation.
I think that's a really good point. I mean, I don't think this is the only domain in which it's true that the inheritors of Trumpism are going to kind of start out-Trumping Trump because, like, I don't think that Trump. I think Trump has made clear in the last several months that, like, he's not really standing for something called Trumpism, right? Like, that's a construct that we developed out of what we liked about Trump's first term and run. And, Trump is famously just completely inconsistent in his relationship of love and hatred, public and splashy expressions of love and hatred with various members of his coalition, right? One day it's like, you're my dear, my beloved, and the next day you're getting fired on Twitter or whatever. And I think McCarthy is somebody who falls under this heading. Like, he did, at one point, he truthed about how bland and kind of useless McCarthy was. And now, he's tweeting about how we all need to gather and get together. I mean, one principle that does seem operative in Trump world, kind of at all times, ironically, given what I've just said, is the concept of loyalty, right? Like, that you circle the wagons, you get on side and so forth. And obviously Trump has decided, that the thing to do is express a kind of get it done attitude. Just get behind this guy and stop dicking around, which is sort of more of an establishment thing. But I'm more interested in what you said about, there are all of these sort of very Trumpy figures now in this very Congress who are who have actual sort of ideas and principles about the way the country should be run that are not necessarily going to be Trump's. Like, Trump is more interested in relitigating the old election and all those grievances and stuff.
Something else that's funny that I thought of, that I noticed anyway. It relates. It's not direct, but on Twitter yesterday. So I guess, there's the C-SPAN footage, and there's really not much going on, right? I mean, there's just they're all just sitting around in chambers. But so there was this footage of AOC talking to Paul Gosar, right?
Yeah.
And they're sitting next to each other and they seem to be having kind of some sort of amiable conversation. And it just cracked me up because Paul Gosar is the one who lost his committee assignments because he had put out some crazy video of, I don't know if this is what it was, but people said it was him assassinating AOC. Okay. One of those types of things. Yeah. So all these people on Twitter, these liberals are they were like, oh my God, she's probably just get away from me, you creep. Or she's just thinking okay, I guess I have to listen to this guy. And then other people were like, no, she's trying to get him to vote for Hakeem Jeffries or something. Basically this whole, and then also there was a video of her talking to Matt Gaetz, and there was similar stuff like she's just what she must be thinking and how gross these guys are and how much they hate each other. But it's so funny that people are so credulous.
Yeah.
That it's to me, it seems like, okay, if in a football game, if the offensive lineman sacks the quarterback,
yeah,
and then you think, oh, they must really hate each other. Or I'm a Cowboys fan, and the Cowboys must hate the other team as much as I do. And they're like, nah, we went to college together and I'm hoping to sign with them next year. I mean, it's like they don't like these, like if one of AOC's big fans like went up to her and Gosar,
Yeah.
they would both be like, who are you?
Ah.
I mean, right? I mean,
Yeah. No,
this idea
okay.
that ideology trumps cronyism.
Right. Well, okay. So first of all, there's some great like false lip sync videos of that Gosar AOC exchange on Twitter. Like there's one where she says she's like talking about how all rocks are her friends. Like she's friends with rocks, but not with plants. Anyway, this is sort of like internet humor. But more seriously, okay. So in parliamentary ethics, right? In Britain up until I mean I think sort of still, but very much in like the Thatcher era and before as well, there was this real ideal that you would get up during prime minister's questions or during like floor debates or whatever, and you would just absolutely tear into each other. I mean, unhinged rhetoric about how your opponent was the death of all light and truth in the world. And then they would go to the pub and have a beer. And this was actually like a good thing. Like this was sort of a sign of a healthy parliamentary process. And, isn't this great that we have this open society where people exchange their views so profoundly, but then also they can get together and club about. And this is also something that I think has obtained in American politics, like this idea you used to have where like, oh yeah, George Bush and Michelle Obama, like they can hug it out and get together and have a good time. But that ideal does kind of depend on a political moment where you don't think like one of the two parties is the death of democracy. And I feel like what you're observing now, which is really true, is like people don't want that out of their politicians on some level anymore, or like they are operating in the headspace of the parliamentary floor debate, and a lot of the politicians are still operating in the headspace of like the pub afterward. We're all going to sort of get along afterward or make our deals or whatever. And there's like a serious disconnect. You're right. Like people think that the sort of display of rhetorical fireworks is reality. And a lot of the frustration, in fact, a lot of the frustration that's being expressed in this speaker vote is that like those rhetorical fireworks don't actually correspond to like the bedrock facts about how their politicians are or aren't fighting for them.
Yeah. I mean, it's so funny because it's like, it's hard to decide which is the most cynical position.
Yeah.
I mean, politicians may well hate each other in fact, but only because like they stand in each other's way for something, for power reasons, right? Mm-hmm. Like not for like ideology necessarily or whatever. I mean, we've all seen those pictures of like Trump and Bill Clinton and Michael Bloomberg and Rudy Giuliani playing golf together.
Sure.
Maybe they're not playing golf together now, but is it so impossible to imagine that they might? I mean, like, if Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump ran into each other and there was no cameras around, like, would they really just be, like, at each other's throats? I don't know,
Yeah.
I mean, there's, like, a lot of show. There's an enormous, and a lot of it's, like, this rhetorical strategy. I mean, it's like a game. It's like this game that they have to play.
Right. I mean, because... I mean, I think one reason why they have to play that game is because increasingly the things that they're discussing are like affecting people's lives in these incredibly painful ways, like stuff like inflation and just, shelling out all this money constantly to Ukraine, whatever, all of these things that, it's like people are feeling the effects of politics in a way they're maybe not used to feeling them. And they're extremely upset about them and thinking about them all the time. And so they kind of expect their politicians to like take it seriously, right? Like they think that, and that all seems like actually to the good. But it does seem as if there is this desire for somebody to come into this whole system that you're delineating, where you got to play the game and you got to like make the deals, and maybe we're like holding our knife behind our back, but we're going to shake hands, we're going to smile and go out for a drink after. Like, I think people want somebody. This was a big part of the Trump phenomenon to begin with, right? They want somebody to come in that just like does not give two flying rats or whatever about that entire architecture, that is willing to be like hated and to totally disregard. And like, that's what they think Kevin McCarthy is not. Like, they don't think that he's the guy that's just gonna like plow through all political niceties, because like that's not what the House Speaker does.
So do you think at this point, like, McCarthy will wind up with the votes by the time this goes up?
Yeah, Thursday? This is real, put it on the line moment, because they're going to have another vote, I think, at 8. I'm looking at these like live updates. It says they're sitting down right now, and McCarthy says he's confident he'll get to 218. I think that the impulse that we've been talking about, that people want, like, they don't actually want business as usual, where this whole thing is really kind of the fighting is a facade and nobody really is all that invested in it. Like, they do want somebody who's invested in it, because they're invested in it. They're hurting. So I think like that impulse is legit, but I think that this is probably not the stage upon which to accomplish that goal. Like, it's unlikely to me that you're going to get what you want out of that, effort. So I would suspect the most likely thing here is like business as usual. Maybe that's not ideal, and maybe that's cynical of me, but I think so. What about you?
Yeah, probably. I think like whatever it is that they want, an investigation, like we were saying, like, okay, really hammer at, maybe something with the January 6th committee. Who knows? Yeah. I mean, whatever it is they want to do, they'll work it out, and everyone will shake hands until the next time or whatever. It sounds about right.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I sympathize with the people that want a battering ram. I just think this is probably not the gate to which one applies a battering ram. Okay, with that, let's talk about Andrew Tate. You brought this possibility up. I think this is a great idea to talk about, or maybe I did and you said yes. I can't remember. Anyway, but this is like I'm excited to talk about this guy, because he's one of these phenomena that has sort of like floated past my vision a million times, and it never really occurred to me to like sit down and be like, well, what is, I feel like such an old man, like, what is this young Andrew Tate fellow all about? But it is one of those things that like there now exists an entire ecosystem. This is a banal observation. There now exists an entire ecosystem of like celebrity and discourse and fandom, like massive, astronomical, international level celebrity that it takes place entirely in this stratum of like social media, especially TikTok, but all the platforms, so that you can be, unimaginably famous, like have a follower count that would like populate a small nation, and nobody can have heard of you like none of the boomers know who you are, or like only some do. And so, for example, I listened to Piers Morgan, the British radio host and TV host, introducing Tate, and he was like carefully explaining, like, on TikTok you get the views and the whatever. So this whole phenomenon is kind of like exists in this split universe where on one level nobody needs me to explain anything about Andrew Tate, and on another level, like, there are probably people who need me to like explain what TikTok is. So like, this guy was on a reality TV show called Big Brother. He was a professional kickboxer. He's a mixed race guy. I think his dad is a Black American and his mom is British.
Yeah.
That's right. And after, during his run on the show, Big Brother, he was kicked off after 6 days because video surfaced of him apparently hitting a woman. He said things on Twitter that people didn't like. And, the woman in the video came out saying this was consensual, but, in any case, he was kicked off the show. And And then he proceeded to amass this enormous social media following. And it to me, is under a kind of like category bucket that I would describe as like the manosphere, which was kind of early, 2010s started to become a thing. You have people like Roosh V. You have obviously BAP, right? Bronze Age Pervert, whom we talked about on this show. And just generally a kind of online culture of discussing, frankly, issues about manhood, masculinity, gender relations in a way that I would say takes a certain pleasure in puncturing feminist pieties and indeed in asserting certain like baseline natural realities about men and women that are now totally unacceptable to say. And so there's like a kind of theater of transgression thing going on here. Tate's particular brand of this, which eventually became also colored by his conversion to Islam, which we'll probably get into, comes along with like potentially defending, ISIS and the Taliban, like not so much because they are so good, but because like, well, they have a right to sort of run their country with law and order. And like, we think we're so great, but we don't have law and order. And so who are we to like say that the Middle Easterners or the Taliban or whatever are wrong? So, if you listen to these interviews he does with Piers Morgan, it's very interesting because it's like 50% sort of, I see how this is something that you feel that you should be allowed to say, and so you're going to say it. Like, and on the other hand, like 50% just kind of like total moral relativism of the kind that, and I would class this in some ways with the Kanye phenomenon in the list of like people for whom saying the thing that is forbidden becomes identical with the truth. Like there's a value in shattering taboos, I grant. And then there's also like, but what is actually true? And so, Tate, I think, like veers into this realm where if something contradicts liberal pieties in the most extreme possible way, then that must be where the truth lies. And so for Kanye, it was like, I'm going to shatter the anti-Semitism piety by, being a virulent anti-Semite. And for Tate, it's sort of like, I'm going to shatter the feminist piety by like, celebrating the Taliban or like, nodding toward the Taliban. All of this as background to say that Tate and his brother have been arrested in Romania as part of a human trafficking and organized crime charge. So now, in addition to like being in trouble with various social media platforms, by the way, he was kicked off of like every platform and then put back on Twitter after Musk came back. But now he's under arrest in Romania. A lot of his assets, which are a big part of his brand, have been confiscated. He's like famous for just ostentatiously spending as much money as possible. Like this makes me the highest status male, whatever. I don't know. It's all like a bit of a soup of interesting intersecting dynamics. But I don't know. Let's start here. Seth, do you think he did it?
Well, I mean, hasn't he been bragging for years that the source of all of his wealth is running like a webcam farm? I mean, he's essentially like he averages himself as like some kind of great pimp, and like he has all these girlfriends and he makes them do like webcams. I mean, his whole ethos is utterly degenerate.
Yeah, like he's low status men have
like,
one
I own
woman.
32 Bugattis. Yeah. And I am like the top G, and I have a whole harem full of women. I mean, his father was actually like one of the first black grandmasters in chess or something.
Right, yeah.
And supposedly said he would make that Andrew Tate was as talented as Bobby Fischer. Apparently, I tend to imagine not. So he decided to go into boxing, and I mean, I've heard him just going on about these, like the most, give some adolescent free reign to imagine himself as like a sexual superhero trillionaire. And those fantasies are basically like how Andrew Tate presents himself to the world. Like, that's the ego ideal. So, Andrew Tate just goes on. I mean, I think Andrew Tate claimed he is a trillionaire. I mean, he's totally demented. But yeah, I mean, it sounds like, I mean, I don't really know why he was arrested, particularly right when he was. I mean, it sounds like, I guess he was living in some kind of weird storage compound next to the Bucharest airport. I mean, it kind of didn't really sound that glamorous, but,
Right.
and, he sold, he had like some kind of pyramid scheme selling, like kind of like pickup artist type material to lonely, probably low status, teenagers or young men or whatever.
Yeah, I kind of admired the sleazy elegance of this. There was at one point when he was kicked off of all the platforms, I think part of the pyramid scheme was that you could like clip his old content and share it on your platform. So then there were just like all of these videos of being shared by you, which was like,
What I think is weird about the Andrew Tate thing is that there's all these kind of, big social media people, like, okay, Darren Beatty seems to have emerged as this big defender of Andrew Tate. And I'm just kind of like, why? I don't know. It doesn't seem like this is the guy that we want to present as like some kind of martyr or hero. I mean, okay, yes, he says a few things that everybody else already says too about, all these, the classic red pill formulations about sexual market value and like man-woman relations and getting past like certain of the received wisdoms about, being a white knight and how in reality women don't really go for good guys and, all these kinds of like certain basic observations about like the dating market. Right. I mean, that appears, but then he takes it into this new level of like, really taking like how women need to be knocked around and all this stuff. Whatever. I mean, it just sounds like a complete moral like cipher.
Yeah,
like
yeah,
a nullity.
Oh man, yeah. Well, I mean, okay, so right, a couple things about him. I think he's very fluent. I mean, I was impressed listening to him today with just I mean, he has certain lines that he kind of repeats over and over again, but they're kind of pithy lines, and he's like any question, he's sort of a master of like deflection. So he's got this kind of media personality thing to him. I think you are right.
Like a heavyweight, like a heavyweight boxer.
Absolutely. Yeah, like a southpaw, which is I think what he is.
Yeah.
He's just he'll deflect any blow you throw at him. It's a the metaphor holds weight, or the simile holds weight. But the other thing about this is, like I think you're right. At this point it's actually not all that insightful to say like feminists are wrong and fundamentally anti-human in their view of gender, and like these things have fallen apart, and these narratives have fallen apart and have harmed people in all sorts of ways. Like lots of people now say that. I think the attraction in his shtick is precisely in the garishness, right? In the over the top, the assertion, and this is why I say that like there's a very real thing that you see a lot now where, because these pieties are so shriekishly enforced, so shrilly enforced, to disregard them with great kind of elan and relish, right?
Yeah.
This is the Trump phenomenon, of course, as well,
Right. Right.
And so then it's like, well, what's the most like assertively over the top offensive version of this that I can say? Well, I'm converting to Islam and I'm getting a harem and I'm supporting ISIS and I'm doing all these things. Like there really is, I think, I don't know, in small ways, I feel like we all get into this, like online, or I do, I'll put it this way. Online, I often will find myself attracted to the most kind of combative and over the top version of the thing that I want to say, precisely because I'm just so pissed off at some person who's been like, you can't say blah, blah, blah. And so like there is, I think, like that's where the moral nihilism comes in, because like then your only compass, your only North Star is just like, how can I make these people as angry as possible? And that's a very appealing shtick. But yeah, like in reality, if that's your only North Star, then of course you're going to end up just being like a guerrilla, basically.
Yeah, and it was kind of interesting because about a month ago or 2 months ago, like news came out that he had converted to Islam. And I think he fell under the sway of like certain Saudi Dawists, like these guys who do convert, like, like Islamic, missionary types.
Sure. Proselytizers.
But like I saw some clip of him with like a Saudi or Emirati billionaire, and the guy was like showing him his comic book collection, which he kept in a vault. Like he had a #1 Superman. Like again, this kind of like teenage boy vision of like infinite riches. And I kind of got the feeling that he sort of was taken by the masculine culture of, the Arabian Peninsula, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know, like, exactly. I mean, whatever. I'm not going to question whether he's like genuine in his imam, but like, his imam. But it's just like funny. I have heard a bunch, like, I guess right after it happened, like Muslims got very, like, all these young Muslim men were very excited.
Okay.
And now since then, like, there's been since his arrest, people are like, oh, did we back him too soon? And others are like, yes, this is the danger of getting excited when celebrities convert.
Oh my gosh, it's exactly like when Kanye made his big Christian album. This is like
it really is.
Yeah. I hadn't thought about that until this moment. But right,
you're right.
Well, I mean, you know a lot more about Islam than I do, I think. I can't tell, but like, it does not seem to me as
I just followed like social media level like debates.
Sure. Well, so neither of us in that case knows that much about Islam. But
I'm not gonna take that on.
I didn't mean to imply by saying you know a lot more than me that you know a lot or even that much. But like you follow some of these guys, and you sort of all of it just simply to say, like, it does not look to me as if Andrew Tate is like carrying his prayer mat around on his private jet.
No,
to like make sure that he observed the 5 pillars or whatever. So yeah, there's definitely, I think, a cultural, in the same way that plenty of people, I think it's fair to say, adopt like Catholicism or Christianity as a sort of socio-political identity, right? Because they identify it as like the marker of true conservatism or whatever. Like, yeah, I think he views Islamic culture, Islamic societies as fundamentally like masculine and male driven, and like you have all these wives and whatever. And he's always going on. I mean, one of his bits is like about how Dubai, I think he was living in Dubai for a while, and their society works, and like the authorities have common sense. And in London, I have to walk around with a security detail just to keep my watch from getting stolen off my wrist. Like, yeah, it's very much. You put it well when you said it's like a kind of adolescent boy fantasy, which is very appealing when, like, again, not news, but masculinity is sort of under assault, and like those.
Well, that reminds me of something else, because he famously said, like, he was born in Chicago and he had this father, and then I guess he moved to England with his mother, which is why he has that weird accent. But at some point he said, like, that he didn't really see his father. He would only see his father once a year, but his father was such a great father that it made up, that it was like the equivalent of having his father every day, which is like such a sad cope.
Yeah.
And it kind of speaks again to this desire that so many people in our society have for like a working family, a working father, which, they've been denied or has lost. And these kind of like looking for a model for effective masculinity.
Right.
And then sadly you become like a porn king in Romania, like basically the most corrupt Eastern European state. Running like some like revolting harem of women whom you keep locked up and force them to do webcam stuff. But the idea that he's sort of emerged, I think it's interesting what you point out. It is a lot like Kanye, and this idea that, and then you see people who rush to his defense despite everything, right? Because like, well, he says he's a Christian, or he says these things that we like, so we have to assume that he's being punished not for his overt mishaps, but for like his esoteric teachings that the power structure can't deal with.
Or like the Kardashians have put an Armenian curse on him or something. Like,
okay,
that was one I heard. I
hadn't heard that
one.
But, okay.
No, yeah, that's one that was out there. But in any case, yeah. When I said this is just like when Kanye put out Jesus is King, like I was recalling that I really liked and still really like Jesus is King, and like wrote about it and thought like this is a pretty impressive. Like, this is an actual attempt to express Christian faith. And so then when Kanye just went completely nuts, it was sort of disappointing. But not because I had, like, claimed him as, once he made that album, now he can do no wrong. Now he is, like, the great champion. I mean, everybody, I think, suffers from this problem of, like, oh, you want to claim this person as some champion because they have some celebrity. It's like, it's very perverse. It's like they have the celebrity and then they say the thing you like. And so you assume that like everything they do, that their celebrity is because of the good things that you like rather than the other way around. Like what you want is somebody to get famous for doing the things that are actually good and virtuous rather than like tacking that on as a potentially, useful extra or whatever. Anyway, I mean, this thing about manhood and masculinity is not limited to Andrew Tate. I mean, it is kind of hard, and there have been, I think, good and bad approaches to this problem where genuinely, like, maleness and femaleness are under assault, and the virtues attendant upon each of the two sexes, kind of disparaged and discouraged or distorted. And so you want to develop a way of kind of reaffirming them and like schooling young people in the manly and feminine virtues and all that stuff. But you don't want to kind of adopt this caricature, this reactive caricature of maleness and femaleness as, just like it can get very cringe very quickly, I guess is what I'm saying. Like even if you're not running a like webcam hooker ring or whatever.
Or praising Hitler.
Or praising Hitler, yeah. Just, for example, right? As one potential like example, I don't know where you cook that up, but yes, I mean, like you want to tread this kind of assertive, positive path, and so many people end up instead in this like reactive, defensive crouch, which you can tell is based on, well, you say I'm. You call me dog, so now but where are my fangs? Like, you say I'm bad, well, watch me be, like, the worst, It's like, great, like, you go, my dude.
Right.
Rock on. And, yeah. Well, okay, the sad tale of Andrew Tate. Wish we could say nicer things about him since we always love people that are willing to stick it to radical feminists, but in point of fact, that ain't it, bro.
Right.
Okay, let's talk about another sad story. Let's talk about David French. So I have, for basically the lifespan of this podcast, I think, been a noted squish on the subject of French bashing, and not because I don't disagree with David French on like innumerable things or find the critiques of him valid, but rather because I just think it's like, enough already. I sort of, Sohrab Ahmari wrote that famous piece now against David Frenchism, and it was sort of identifying in French a kind of embodiment of this ostentatiously respectable and compromise-driven conservatism that is always bound to squish and just, is doing liberalism 20 years delayed and will constantly come out, saying, well, I'm a conservative, but I hate Donald Trump or whatever. And then you give the left ammo, and that's kind of, they love this because they'll accept all your concessions and make none of their own. And so this was Amari's argument about French. French, I have always sort of said, then proceeded to respond by embodying the caricature of him that was implicit in that piece, sort of entering into and occupying the very thing that Amari said he was. And this was, I think, a major tectonic fault line. This was as the realignment was happening, as people were becoming aware of the very real debates within the right, within the Republican Party that we were talking about in our first segment, Amari French became almost a byword for a way to think about those two things. And so my feeling about that was okay, fine. So, now we know that there is this fault line. We all sort of know which side we stand on it. So, so why kick a man when he's down? Why continue to just use David French as the one and only? He was always only kind of a convenient illustrator for Amari in that piece. It's not this person is the source of all our woes or whatever. And that having been said, he does sort of keep giving his enemies cannon fodder in a certain way. And the latest, very Frenchian thing he's done is become an opinion columnist at the New York Times. Famous role for anybody that wants to be domesticated opposition. We have currently at the Times Ross Douthat as kind of the conservative voice. And I think he does a pretty good job of not being just the pet good conservative or whatever. But on the other hand, it's hard to look at this as anything other than the Times making an effort to anoint and legitimate the kind of conservatism that it will accept, namely the kind of conservatism that will basically give it everything that it wants. And every other, the whole project at the Times, it seems, is to define a whole major branch of the right, a vital and energized portion of the right, to define that portion out of political legitimacy by associating it with racism, transphobia, hatred, whatever, coups, all the bad stuff. And to me, this reads like a version of just another, kind of counterpoint to that effort. It's okay, so those bad conservatives, they aren't even really real conservatives. They're, hateful, anti-Semite, bigot, evil Trumpians read a decent, sizable portion of the country, if not solid plurality of the country. In any case, here's what they write when they anoint French as their new conservative. They say, writing about politics and current affairs in the era of Donald Trump ideally requires a variety of traits that do not always or even often go together: factual and intellectual clarity, moral seriousness, and a spirit of generosity toward oneself, toward others, and humility toward oneself. Happily, for Times opinion, those traits are embodied to an exceptional degree by David French, who is joining us as our newest columnist beginning January 30th. Seth, am I wrong to read this as another brick in the edifice of basically the only anyone to the right of French is considered anathema?
No, I think that's exactly what they're doing. Thus far and no farther. David Brooks, Bret Stephens, Ross Douthat, now David French. I guess David French is I guess he's the Protestant right wing person they have going now. I guess it's nice that they're giving Protestants representation.
Yeah.
I don't know. But
Protestant lives matter, man.
Yeah. So, I'm just looking here at a tweet he wrote November 7th, 2020. I disagree, this is David French. I disagree with many Biden policies, but on a human level, I'm happy for him. He suffered such heartbreak in his life. He was mocked for running after 2 bad losses. He ran a campaign focused on unity and healing, and a record number of Americans put him in the Oval Office. Okay, this is the day after the election, a couple days after the election, which was, I don't even, had it even been called by that? I guess this is maybe after they called it. This is the sort of thing you're going to get. I still remember in 2016 or 2015 when Bill Kristol, maybe I've talked about this on the podcast before. The funniest thing I ever heard was when Bill Kristol proposed that David French should run for the Republican nomination for president.
I remember that. Yes.
And it just struck me as like the ultimate in kind of like dinner party candidacies. Like, I have a great idea.
Yeah.
David, you should run for president. I think, you would be, I think we could really get the people behind you.
You've got my vote. Yeah.
I mean, he'll be like, it's like the pet conservative for New York Times. They'll be like, see, we allow all kinds of voices that hate Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And who think that drag queen story hour shouldn't be opposed in libraries, public libraries.
And that big tech is like untouchable by any sort of legal action.
Right, because that would be creeping socialism if we were to like try to tell. Yeah, except for Twitter. I'm sure David French probably thinks that like Elon Musk has gone too far, and that maybe I don't know. It just seems kind of like, it almost seems like a coda. It's like so funny to like, oh, so this is, yes, they found a place for David French. Okay, makes sense.
So I just finished reading this novel, The Razor's Edge, by Somerset Maugham, and you've read it, and maybe this is a spoiler alert, but it doesn't really give anything away. The last line says like, everybody got what they wanted, and it's like, because they all, the characters all end up in these various situations, some good, some bad, but it's like everybody sort of followed their desire. I feel that way about David French. It's like everybody got what they wanted, and like here's French. It's like similar to if he had ended up as a contributor at like MSNBC or something.
Sure.
And right, this far and no further is a good way to put it. It's like, it's sort of one degree of separation away from like Jennifer Rubinism, where every sentence begins with "I'm a conservative, but," right? It's like, I'm a conservative, but I object to this major conservative cause at the moment, and here's why. And associating that, and then laundering that into principle, right? Like, if you don't feel that way, then it's because you have no principle and you're just going with whatever the party believes. It's a very, I guess I'm less concerned with the David French of it all, because I genuinely think that, like, and again, I'm a squish here, but like, I think David French should argue and believe whatever he sincerely argues and believes. Like, it's not my business to like call into question like what kind of Twitter likes he's trying to get, or what kind of audience he's trying to cultivate, or position he's trying to get at the Times. Like, I'm actually much less concerned with French as a commentator than I am with the Times and what they are up to, because it's so transparent, and it's obviously designed with they know exactly what they're doing, and that part of it to me actually seems like much more evil and pernicious than anything David French might disagree with me about, It's like what French is being used for, which I guess I would say in some sense is a criticism of French, because it should give him pause, right, to consider like who's applauding, right? Who likes what he's doing. This is a paper in a media culture which is currently being just delegitimized before our eyes via the Twitter files. Like, this is something I don't think we still aren't talking enough about. Like, okay, so the Twitter files revealed some things that were explosive and some things that maybe we already knew, but just were being confirmed. But the more important story is that, like, these are readily accessible pieces of information with digging that culminate into like a serious issue for like American speech, for government intervention into the public square. Like, and the press is like, it's bad to talk about this. Like, that's what the kind of like our media thinks is like, the legacy press thinks that it's actually bad to do reporting. And so it's like, if one of the foremost institutions in that obviously corrupt system anoints you as the voice of conservatism, or even a voice of conservatism, like, I do think, I guess, that it should give you pause about whether, like, who you're working for, basically.
Yeah, here, just a month ago, David French wrote for The Atlantic a piece that they called Elon Musk and Tucker Carlson don't understand the First Amendment. Twitter is a private company, not the federal government. Saying that everyone is taking this too far. If Twitter Twitter, maybe they shouldn't have suppressed the New York Post story, but they were certainly within their rights to do it, et cetera, et cetera. But all of that completely ignores everything that the Twitter files have demonstrated, which is that Twitter was functioning as part of the federal government.
Right.
It was completely infested by the FBI, and they basically were taking orders from the FBI as well as other, alphabet agencies. So, pretending that, well, because the ownership structure technically was not, because it was still it was a publicly traded company, therefore it's not the federal government. It's I think it's I think it would be generous to call it naive, and it's like kind of like cynical or deluded.
Well, I mean, certainly the defense of these platforms, when they're being run by the right people, by the journalists who are, hypothetically at least, supposed to be watchdogs, who are constantly extolling themselves and their place in society by virtue of the very fact that they, are of no party or clique, and they'll sniff out corruption wherever it may be. And then it turns out, right, as you say, that the whole argument that these are private companies is basically collapsing before our eyes. The FBI and the various other government agencies are like intimately wrapped up with these corporations, as indeed they were involved in building them into the massive monopolistic entities that they now are. Like, this is all an old story. If you've been reading like James or whatever, we all know that these are, parastate entities in some form or another. Maybe we can't recognize them in exactly the same form as like the East India Trading Company once was, but whatever, times change, technology is new, that there's obviously deep set business government collusion going on here. And these media outlets, for whatever else they may protest, like, these media outlets benefit from it, because the voices that are being silenced are in large part voices which present alternative narratives to the kind of cloud of just ceaseless, bias that was impenetrable until these platforms came along. And suddenly there were all these independent voices, and it's like, oh, clamp down on that. And in fact, the government wants your help clamping down on it. And the New York Times is like all too happy to see it happen, and in fact will cheer it on as like the end of hate or whatever. And like, again, something you can say, legitimately acknowledge for French, like, he received absolutely hideous and vile attacks on his family, like, as part of the whole Trump debate. So that's informs his views on this stuff too. But at a certain point, as you say, right, you have to like just wonder like where the bread is getting buttered here. Like, what is the point of being constantly on the side of these massive, like, Borg conglomerates of state with journalism, with journalistic outlets, with Twitter and other social media platforms? Like, cui bono?
Yeah, sure. And, of course, the New York Times is the original, like, parastate media outlet that has, at the same time, promotes ferociously the idea that it's, an obstinate press, a obstreperous press, that it's, that promoting like ceaselessly the idea that they are the enemy of the government, that they are opposed to the state,
right,
and that they're always doing everything they can to, explode secrecy or whatnot. But really, again, it's a thus far and no further dynamic where, they will play up partisan differences as though they're talking about like really what's going on with the functioning of the deep state and its relation to other aspects of society. So, he'll fit right in. Probably this Atlantic piece on Twitter, and saying the Twitter files released so far do not describe a violation of the First Amendment. Instead, they detail the exercise of First Amendment rights by independent private actors. That was probably what like sold the New York Times on like hiring him.
Yeah, I mean, that's
so...
like, I can't, again, I keep wanting to not French bash. I can't imagine how anybody could write that sentence. Anyway, no, this is all, your point about the Times is well taken. This notion that these are the ones to speak truth to power. I mean, democracy dies in darkness, the Washington Post, right? That's supposed to be the whole point. That's the reason we're supposed to like respect journalists to begin with, is because they are our last redoubt of truth in a cynical and interested political world. Like, these guys are just going to go out there and fight the scrappy fight against the big guy. And right, I mean, that whole facade has just collapsed so spectacularly.
I mean, look at how Barry Weiss got a lot of the same criticism when she was hired to work at the Times, as like she was going to be like their pet conservative, and people were really. And then she left, basically saying, I mean, I can't remember exactly what her reasons were, but I mean, didn't she essentially feel like she was being stifled?
Oh yeah, it was that, and then her colleagues like talking about her, and I mean, it was just like a terrible, this whole thing where like young Zoomers now come up into these newsrooms and they're like, I feel unsafe.
Oh, right.
To work with, like,
yes.
all that stuff.
But now that she's like been participating with Musk in the Twitter files releases, I mean, they talk about her like, not only is she not a journalist or a reporter, she's not even a writer. She's just like some kind of like, I mean, she's really getting it. I mean, Matt Taibbi too.
I liked the one where somebody was what Barry has done is she's like married a wealthy lesbian heiress and, gotten past all journalistic standards by becoming independently wealthy. It's like, that was a long game, man. If that was that was her goal. It's just like, all I really need is to marry a wealthy lesbian.
Sure.
Anyway.
But, so David French, I guess I'm sure he'll prosper.
Well, yes, that's true. It's like, it doesn't matter what we think of him. Like, there's a place for him in the coming regime.
Right.
Oh, man. Well, this is always really fun, Seth. I have to say, I miss our colleagues, but it's great.
I enjoy our two-handers.
Me too. Yeah. It's a fun irregular segment. All right, that is it for us this week. We will be back again next week, but for now, thank you all for listening to the Roundtable. If you'd like to learn more about our podcast, you can visit our website and all of our programs at Claremont.org, ClaremontReviewOfBooks.com, and AmericanMind.org. Plus, you can find out about our DC-based Center for the American Way of Life at dc.claremont.org. You can also support the show, and this is extra important, by sharing, subscribing, and reviewing. This is the big one. Leave us a 5-star review, please, if you like what we do. If you don't enjoy this work, then you can at least keep your opinions to yourself. 5-star reviews only, please, and let everybody know about the podcast. And thanks to our production and engineering crew, including Jake Gannon and Logan Zeppieri. And thanks to you all for listening. Talk to you next week.